The night my son looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not my father anymore." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I picked up my phone, walked to the back porch, and made one call. My brother answered on the second ring. I said 3 words, "It's time, Dwight." He said, "I'll handle it." And I hung up. What happened next, they never saw coming. But let me back up, because you need to understand who these people really were before you can understand why I had no choice. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 41 years building something from nothing. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, in a house with thin walls and thinner finances. My father worked double shifts at a rubber plant and still sometimes had to choose between the electric bill and groceries. I swore to myself at 17 years old that I would never make that same choice, and I didn't. I put myself through community college, then transferred to Ohio State on a partial scholarship, worked nights at a UPS sorting facility to cover the rest, got my degree in civil engineering, took a job with a mid-sized construction firm in Columbus, worked my way up, saved aggressively, invested carefully, and by the time I was 53, I had retired with a net worth that would have made my father weep with disbelief. Part of that wealth was a 4-unit residential property I owned outright in the east side of Columbus. No mortgage, no partners, no debt. I bought it in 2004 when the market was favorable, renovated it myself on weekends with my brother Dwight over the course of 2 years. The top unit was where I lived after my wife passed from ovarian cancer in 2017. God, I miss her every single day. But that's a different story. The ground floor unit I rented to a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Poole, who was the ideal tenant. Quiet, respectful, always paid 3 days early. The other 2 units I kept as income properties, and the rental income, combined with my pension and Social Security, meant I lived comfortably without touching my savings. My son knew I was well off. He didn't know the specifics, and I never volunteered them. I raised him to work hard and stand on his own feet. His mother and I paid for his college. No loans. That was our gift to him. We helped him with a down payment on his first car when he turned 22. Beyond that, we believed in him earning his own way, and for a while he did. Then he married my daughter-in-law. She came from a nice enough family on the surface. Her parents were from outside Pittsburgh. Her father had done some kind of sales work. Her mother had been a school aide. They seemed pleasant the first few times I met them, though my wife, God rest her, had pulled me aside after one Sunday dinner and said quietly, "That woman is already calculating what we're worth." I'd told her she was being too hard on them. I wish I had listened. My son and my daughter-in-law got married in the fall of 2019. Nice wedding, nothing extravagant. I paid for the rehearsal dinner, which was the tradition, and I gave them a substantial cash gift to help with their honeymoon. They settled in a 2-bedroom apartment in Dublin, the suburb northwest of Columbus. Both of them were working, my son in IT project management, my daughter-in-law in pharmaceutical sales. They weren't struggling, they were doing fine. The first sign of trouble came about 18 months into the marriage. My daughter-in-law called me, not my son, her, and announced, in the cheerful tone people use when they've already decided something isn't a negotiation, that her parents were having some financial difficulties. Her father's company had downsized, he'd taken a severance, and they'd been unable to keep up with their mortgage. She explained that, rather than putting them in some depressing situation, she thought it made the most sense for them to move into the ground floor unit of my building. She said she'd already talked it over with my son, and he agreed it was a good idea. I asked her what the rent would be. She laughed like the question was a small misunderstanding. "Dad," she said. She'd started calling me Dad about 6 months into the marriage, which I never corrected but never entirely warmed to either. Their family. Obviously, we're not talking about rent. I told her I understood her position, but the ground floor unit was occupied by a long-term tenant who had a valid lease. She said the lease would be up in 4 months. She said they could just hold on until then and move in at that point. She said it like I had already agreed. like the whole thing was a scheduling question. I told her I appreciated that her parents were going through a difficult time. I told her I was sorry to hear it, and I told her that my properties were income properties, that I had a responsibility to my own financial planning, and that I wasn't in a position to offer free housing to her parents. The phone went silent for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "I see. That was it. That was all," she said. My son called me 20 minutes later. I won't repeat everything he said, but the gist was that I was being unreasonable and selfish, that her parents were family now, that family takes care of family, and that he couldn't believe after everything they'd done for me, and I'm still not sure what that was referring to since I had done considerably more for them than the reverse. I was turning my back on them over money. He used the word money like it was something dirty, like I had hoarded it out of greed rather than decades of sacrifice and discipline. I listened. I didn't argue. I said, "Son, I hear you." And my answer is no. He hung up. That was March. By the time Christmas came around, the surface had smoothed over. My daughter-in-law had apparently helped her parents find a rental in a neighboring suburb, Westerville, that was manageable on a combination of her father's severance and some assistance from a relative on her mother's side. Things seemed fine. My son and I had dinner a few times, and he never brought it up again, and I thought maybe we'd move past it. I was wrong. Christmas Eve, my son hosted dinner at their apartment for the first time. His in-laws were there. My brother Dwight was there with his wife. It was a decent enough evening until after dinner, when the dishes were cleared and we were all sitting in the living room with coffee. My daughter-in-law stood up and announced, again, that cheerful, already decided tone, that they had some exciting news. She said that she and my son had decided to buy a house. I said that was wonderful, and I meant it. She said they'd found a place in New Albany, which is a well-to-do community east of Columbus. Nice schools, nice streets, upscale but not ostentatious. She showed us photos on her phone. It was a 4-bedroom colonial, asking price around $620,000. I told them congratulations and asked how they were planning to finance it. She smiled. "Well, that's the thing. With current rates, we need a little help with the down payment to keep the monthly manageable." I looked at my son. He was looking at the coffee table. She said they were hoping I could gift them $80,000 toward the down payment. She said it calmly, the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. $80,000 on Christmas Eve. Dwight shifted in his chair. His wife looked at the ceiling. I set my cup down. I said, "That's a significant amount of money, and this is the first I'm hearing of this. I'd want to sit down with you both, separately, and talk through the full picture before I committed to anything." She nodded and said, of course, but her eyes had already changed. I'd been around long enough to recognize when someone was reclassifying you. I'd gone from asset to obstacle in the space of about 4 seconds. The conversation moved on, but later that night, when Dwight and I were standing outside in the cold watching the neighborhood light up around us, he said to me, "You see what's happening here, don't you?" It wasn't a question. I told him I did. He said, "She's not asking you to help your son. She's extracting, and she's going to keep going until there's nothing left." Dwight is 10 years older than me. He's been through a marriage, a divorce, a business partnership that went sideways, and a lawsuit that nearly cleaned him out before he won it on appeal. He understands how people operate when money is involved. He said, "Let me make some calls. I want to know what's in their financial picture that they're not telling you." I told him I wasn't looking for a war. He said, "It's already a war. You're just the only one who doesn't know it yet." I told him to go ahead. New Year's came and went. My son called me in mid-January and asked if I'd had a chance to think about the down payment. I told him I was still considering it and that I'd like to see their full financial situation, their combined income, their existing debt, their savings, before making any decision. He said that was a little insulting. I said it was standard practice for any financial gift of that size, and that any estate attorney would tell him the same thing. He didn't argue further, But his daughter-in-law texted me 2 days later. The text was long. It talked about how much they'd struggled, how hard they were working, how unfair it was that my son had grown up with financial security and now couldn't even access it when he needed it. It used phrases like iniquity of wealth and gatekeeping your own family's future. At the end, it said she knew I was a good man and she just hoped I would search my heart. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Dwight. He called me back within an hour. He said, "I found something. You need to hear this." Dwight had hired a private investigator, not for surveillance, just for financial records research, which is legal and more thorough than people assume. What the investigator found was that my daughter-in-law had set up an LLC about 14 months earlier, shortly after they'd gotten married. The LLC was registered in Delaware, which is common for tax reasons, but the business, ostensibly a consulting operation, had only one client. A wellness startup that my son had quietly co-founded and funneled money into from his personal accounts. The startup had generated no revenue, but money had flowed from my son's account into the LLC and from the LLC into an account that was solely in my daughter-in-law's name. Not a joint account, her name only. The amounts weren't massive, about $34,000 over 14 months, but the structure was deliberate. She was building a separate financial reserve that my son either didn't fully understand or had been convinced was for business purposes. Dwight said, "This woman is not planning a future with your son. She is planning an exit, and she intends to fund it with your money." I sat with that for 3 days. Then in February, my son called me and said they'd decided to go ahead with the New Albany house regardless, using a conventional loan, and that the monthly payment was going to be tight, and they just wanted me to know they might need help here and there going forward. I said I understood. I said I wished them well. I did not offer anything. My daughter-in-law called me 1 week later and told me, without greeting or preamble, that her parents' landlord in Westerville had given them a 60-day notice. The landlord was selling the property and that she needed me to let them move into my open unit. I told her the unit had a prospective tenant. She said to just hold off on signing the lease. I told her I couldn't do that, she said, and I will never forget this. "You know what your problem is? You act like everything you have was earned by you alone. But your son was part of this family too. We are part of this family. And you are choosing your rental income over your own grandchildren." They did not have children, and the mention of hypothetical grandchildren felt like a particularly cold manipulation. "I have been nothing but patient with you. But this is the last time I'm going to ask nicely," I said. "I appreciate you letting me know." She hung up. I called Dwight. I said, "It's time, Dwight." He said, "I'll handle it." 2 days later, my son got a certified letter from a law firm downtown. Not a flashy firm, a serious one, the kind with a plain letterhead and attorneys who've been practicing for 30 years and have no need to advertise. The letter informed him that the property at my address, the building where they had assumed I simply lived, was held in a revocable living trust, of which I was the grantor and trustee, and that any transfer of units, modification of tenancies, or encumbrance on the property would require my sole discretion as trustee. The letter also noted that my son was listed as a contingent beneficiary, not a primary one, and that the trust terms could be amended at any time at my discretion. He called me that afternoon, voice high and strained. "Dad, what is this? What is this letter?" I told him it was exactly what it said it was. He said, "I didn't know you had a trust." I said, "There are a number of things you don't know about my financial arrangements." He said, "This feels like a threat." I said, "It's a disclosure. You asked where things stood. Now you know." My daughter-in-law called 15 minutes later. She had clearly been briefed. The cheerful tone was completely gone. "You think this is funny?" she said. "You think this is some kind of game? We have given years to this family. I have put up with your coldness and your control and your little tests, and now you want to play lawyer games with us? I promise you, you will regret this. My father has a friend who is an attorney, and we will. I said, "Please put that in writing and send it to the address on the letterhead." She went silent. Then she said something that I won't repeat here because it was ugly and personal, and said more about her character than anything else in this story. I hung up. Over the next 6 weeks. I heard from my son twice, and from my daughter-in-law not at all. My son's messages were alternately apologetic and defensive. In the first one, he said she hadn't meant what she said and that things had gotten out of hand, and he hoped we could have dinner and talk. In the second one, sent 3 weeks later, he said he was beginning to realize some things about the situation that he hadn't seen clearly before. He didn't say what those things were, but the tone was different. Something had shifted. Dwight told me later that my son had apparently discovered, through looking at their shared financial software, they used one of those budgeting apps that links to all your accounts, that there were accounts he hadn't known about. He didn't confront her immediately. He started paying attention quietly. In April, my son called me and asked if we could meet. Alone, without her knowing. We met at a diner in Worthington on a Tuesday morning. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. He ordered coffee and didn't touch it. He said, "Dad, I owe you an apology that I don't even have adequate words for." I let him talk. He said he had found the Delaware LLC. He said he had gone back through 14 months of bank statements and pieced together where the money had gone. He said he had confronted her and she had initially denied it, then said it was for their future. Then, when he pushed further, admitted she had been protecting herself in case the marriage didn't work out. He sat across from me in that diner booth, this son I raised, and his hands were shaking slightly on the table, and he said, "I don't know who she is." I reached across and put my hand on his. I said, "I know, and I'm sorry. That was the hardest part. Not the anger, not the manipulation, not even the threats. The hardest part was watching my son sit there in that diner and realize that the person he'd built his life around had been quietly planning to leave him. The situation moved quickly after that. My son retained his own attorney, separate from my trust attorney, and began the process of formally separating their finances. The LLC was a complication, but not an insurmountable one. His attorney filed for a forensic accounting as part of the preliminary divorce proceedings, which my daughter-in-law apparently had not anticipated. The $34,000 that had moved through the LLC would need to be accounted for and potentially returned as marital assets. Her parents, who had continued living in Westerville on a month-to-month lease while all of this played out, ultimately found a 2-bedroom apartment in a senior-friendly complex in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, near where her mother's sister lived. That was their solution, arranged by their own family, as it should have been from the start. My daughter-in-law hired a divorce attorney, the kind whose billboard I used to see on the highway, with a professional smile and a tagline about fighting for what you deserve. The proceedings took about 11 months. The new Albany house they had purchased, the one that was making them financially tight, was sold as part of the settlement. The equity was split. The Delaware LLC assets were ordered, returned to the marital estate. Her separate account was partially offset against her share of the marital assets. She walked away with considerably less than she had planned for. My son moved into the open unit in my building temporarily while he got his footing back. We had dinner together most Sunday evenings. I taught him to make the chicken soup his mother used to make. We watched football on Sunday afternoons and didn't always talk about what had happened because there was sometimes nothing useful to say, and that was okay. Dwight came over one Sunday in November, and the three of us sat on the back porch after dinner with beers, watching the last of the fall color disappear from the maple trees in the yard. Dwight said, "You know what the funny thing is? She thought the whole game was about the building. She never understood that the building was never the point." My son looked at him. "What was the point?" Dwight looked at me. I said, "Finding out who people are before they can do real damage." My son nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else. But he understood. I won't tell you that I forgave her easily or quickly, because that would not be true. I won't tell you that my son didn't make mistakes in judgment that I wish he hadn't made, because that would not be true either. And I won't tell you that I handled everything perfectly, because I am 64 years old and I have been around long enough to know that nobody does. What I will tell you is this. My son is sitting across from me at dinner most Sundays now, and he is learning for the first time as a grown man what it actually means to build something that belongs to you. He is working longer hours than he has in years. He is saving carefully. He is asking questions about how money works, real questions, the kind he should have been asking in his 20s, and when I answer them, he listens. That, more than anything else, is the thing that almost broke me. Not her manipulation, not her threats, not the LLC, not any of it. What almost broke me was realizing that somewhere between the comfortable childhood I gave him and the man he had become, my son had lost the instinct to take care of himself, and I had to ask myself what part of that was my doing. I don't have a clean answer. I'm not sure I ever will. What I do know is that the last time I spoke to my daughter-in-law was in the parking lot of the courthouse on the day the divorce was finalized. She walked past me without saying anything. I didn't call after her. There was nothing left to say. I walked to my car, sat down, and I thought about my wife. I thought about what she would have said. I thought about that Sunday dinner years ago when she had pulled me aside and said quietly, "That woman is already calculating what we're worth." And I thought about how I had told her she was being too hard on them. Then I started the car and drove home.